Welcome back to TTR Unleashed, broadcasting live and worldwide on the planet KGRAradio.com. Our first guest serves as a tenure-track professor at The Ohio State University in behavioral sciences and has given himself to sharing his work as a scholar specializing in wise decision-making, emotional and social intelligence, goal achievement, meaning and purpose, mental health and emotional well-being, and altruism with the world. Professor Gleb Tsipursky joins us. Did I say that right, Gleb?
That's right. That was
perfect. Good job.
Well, Gleb joins us here on the mothership to talk to us about living better lives. So, Gleb, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate being on the show. Thanks for
having you here, for sure.
I was perusing your website a little bit to learn a little bit about your work, and I'm just kind of fascinated. How does a person like you decide that this needs to be his life work? I know you've been in this for well over 25 years. You know, you see the world as it is. People are just making dumb choices left and right. Don't say anything, Warren. I know.
I made my choice not to say anything.
Right. Good choice. Where does it all start at, Gleb?
Well, it all started when I was a kid and teenager, really. And I just looked at people around me making decisions, and I saw that those decisions led to bad outcomes, and the process by which they made those decisions was bad. They didn't really gather sufficient information. They didn't think about their options. They just kind of went with their, often their gut reactions or what their people around them told them to do. They didn't really think ahead into the long term. And, you know, garbage in, garbage out. You don't really put in good information and good consideration, you don't end up in a good place. Right. And, you know, that's when companies end up being bankrupt and we elect politicians who are bad for our society and don't really represent us well. And when relationships end and when people, you know, make bad decisions about investments like buying a house in 2007 and then being underwater in 2008.
So this your work goes far deeper than just an individual perspective. You're looking at the big picture as far as business, community, school, anything, politics, all of it.
Yes, all of it. All of this involves decision making by individuals and by groups and institutions. So I look at all of these things, and my research focuses on business and politics most. These are the things I focus more on. My earlier research focused on a sense of meaning and purpose, so kind of long-term goals and aspirations. And right now, my work, I founded a nonprofit called Intentional Insights at intentionalinsights.org. And that nonprofit popularizes the research on decision-making to a broad audience. And it's focusing on all things, but especially on politics right now, because we think that there's a bigger need in that area right now.
Yeah. Indeed, my friend.
For sure. So tell me, why do we make bad decisions? Is it because too many of us are reacting instead of acting, or what is your interpretation of bad decision making?
Sure. So just for defining terms, bad decision making are decisions that have a process that doesn't lead to our goals. It's highly suboptimal for our goals. You know, Decisions are only relevant to the extent that they help us reach our goals. And so the reason that many people make poor decisions is that they don't actually think about their goals when making decisions, and they don't take into account all the information that they should in making decisions, or don't weigh it appropriately, all the information that they should in making decisions. I'll give you an example. So, and there are, somebody can have a decision to buy a house. Let's go with buying a house in 2007. People who bought a house in 2007 were thinking that, well, hey, house prices rose before and they'll continue to rise. Therefore, I should buy this house, put zero down, and just get a high mortgage rate.
It's kind of like seeing somebody win the lottery and then they run out and buy a bunch of lottery tickets.
Yes, exactly. Everybody else was winning the lottery, right? Yeah. But so why not join them, right? And they don't realize that this is the same way that pyramid schemes work.
You're right. Yeah.
This is the way that, everybody else is getting a payout. Why not get a payout too? Well, at some point, the pyramid scheme collapses. And that's what the housing bubble of 2008 was, just a pyramid scheme. where eventually it's going to collapse when not enough people are willing to buy into the pyramid scheme. And that's what happened. So people they were quite greedy, and they didn't think about the long-term implications of their purchase. They didn't think that, well, hey, at some point, house prices will stop rising. What will happen if I'm on the hook when the house prices stop rising? So that's an example of where people really didn't think about the long-term implications of what they were doing.
And so how does one begin? I mean, look, I know many people, myself included, whose entire life was based on impulse. It's just what I was taught. And so if you're kind of a person seeking this kind of education where, you want to know more about the decisions you're making, I mean, what kind of steps, what do you recommend to somebody who wants to live a more fulfilling life, knowing what the hell they're doing, if you will?
Good question. So the first thing to know is how our minds work. And this is the fundamental step to decision making, knowing how we work, how we think.
Yeah.
There are two systems of human thinking. One is the emotional, intuitive gut reaction system. It's called in the scholarship System 1 or the autopilot system. I prefer the autopilot system. It's a more intuitive name. So the autopilot system is our quick, emotional, intuitive, impulsive reactions. That's the gut instinct. And it's very easy. It feels very comfortable. This is why it's our gut intuitions. It feels very comfortable to go with our guts. Now, the other system is much weaker and smaller. It's the deliberative, reflective system. It's called System 2 or the intentional system. Again, I prefer the intentional system. It's more intuitive, that name.
I see. Yeah.
And it's reflective, deliberative, conscious. It's effortful. It's hard to turn on. It does not feel intuitive. It feels like you're really straining to make.
You're forcing against it, if you will.
Yes, you're going against your gut. So the intuitive emotional system is the older, much more powerful system. It has evolved it's the same system that animals have. It's the flight or fight response. It's the amygdala response. It's the lizard brain. People have called these various things. The intentional system is the more conscious, reflective, deliberative system. So, for example, if you are getting in an annual evaluation meeting with your boss, and your boss is criticizing you for your performance, there are going to be your gut reactions, well, depending on who you are. Some people will want to shout, will want to put their fingers into their ears and shout, la, 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 I can't hear you.
That's pretty much when Warren has to hear anything I have to say. So.
You sound like the teacher on Peanuts to me.
Continue, Gleb.
Sure. So that's kind of the flight response. Now, the fight response is when you want to punch your boss in the mouth.
Wow, I can't tell you what I just got looked at like. Oh, goodness.
So there you go. So that's the impulsive system. Now, and what happens when we give into those impulses? Well, we're not going to really have a job.
Well, there's lots of consequences for that kind of behavior.
For sure. Yeah.
Yes, lots of consequences, exactly. So that's when we feel ourselves straining against our gut impulse to plug our ears or to punch our boss in the nose, we feel our reflective, intentional system working. That it's effortful, it's hard, it's not easy. Or the same thing when we choose to not eat that second piece of chocolate cake. Same thing. It's
bad choice.
Yeah.
There you go. So it's not an easy thing to do, or to go and exercise. It's not an easy thing to do. So we have to know that our gut intuitions will, in many cases, lead us astray. And that's really fundamental, that these impulses will, in many cases, lead us in the wrong direction. So learning the basic fundamental framework of this is learning a number of situations when our gut reactions will lead us astray, and avoiding giving in to gut reactions in those cases.
Let me take it a little step further, if I could. Now, let's talk about like American society, for example. A lot of parents today, especially, they're raising children with television and or other forms of distraction. Mm-hmm. There is no mentoring. Hell, there ain't even spanking or the old way. It's just a very, very different way. Now, that said, there's a lot of opportunity for people to think on a much deeper level, especially growing people, and I've seen it time and time again where teenagers can turn a very difficult young life into something quite great just because their mind got switched on.
And vice versa.
Yeah. So at the heart of it, what can we do to change society's view on, even making decisions? So many people just don't even think about making decisions. They just do,
Absolutely. So this is the science of what's called the Meta DecisionMaking, looking at our decisions as something that we can change, we can shift. So most people don't realize they can do that. They have what's called a fixed mindset. They have a fixed mindset. They think that, this is the way I am. They don't realize they can have a growth mindset, that they can develop and strengthen and improve their decision making. So this is what I'm devoted to. This is then what I'm focusing on. This is what I care about. And this is what the nonprofit that I founded, Intentional Insights, at intentionalinsights.org, is doing, helping people improve their decision making. And I do consulting on this. Companies pay me big bucks to go and help them make better decisions.
Good for you, making good decisions.
Yes, and they make good decisions because I bring them quite a bit of value. So, for example,
absolutely,
there's a company that I'm working with that's going through a merger with another company. And there are so many decisions that they have to go through to make that merger. So I help guide them through how to avoid disasters that go through a merger. And what
kind of disasters come from that kind of thing?
Oh gosh, things like employees in the new company that they're acquiring leaving en masse, or being disgruntled, or sabotaging their work, or the brands of the two organizations not meshing. So people distrusting one of the brands because of this merger. Mergers are often known to not work out very well. So what I'm going through with them, and this is a technique that anyone can use for any sort of major decision, is to consider all the things that might go wrong, evaluate them, give them certain probabilistic estimates. How likely are they to go wrong, and how bad it will be if they go wrong? And then what can you do to avoid that?
Without having numbers on it, would you say that your instinct would be a good thing to trust in that regard when you're thinking about the things that could go wrong?
Good question.
No, not necessarily at all. It depends on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. So
indeed.
We have about, what the research shows, something like over 100 thinking errors that cause us to make bad decisions. They're called cognitive biases by scholars. So your audience can go to check out the list of cognitive biases on Wikipedia. I usually don't recommend Wikipedia, but in this case it's quite good. The article is worked on by scholars, and they add new cognitive biases every month because it's cutting-edge research. So there are over 100 thinking errors, and two of these thinking errors are the optimism bias and the pessimism bias.
Errors, huh? Wow.
Yes. Pessimists will tend to overestimate risks and underestimate rewards. That means that they won't take enough advantage of opportunities, and they will tend to make bad decisions. They'll think that everything is going to go wrong, therefore I shouldn't even do anything. And if that's the attitude that pessimists will take.
Yes.
God, I would be more optimistic.
Yeah.
But I just don't think it would help.
You're still my thunder there, Warren.
What's up there, Zing? Oh,
awesome.
My God. He's in the wrong business. Comedy. I'm telling you. Continue, Gleb, please.
Sure. So optimists will think that, everything will go fine, and they don't prepare for problems. So most of the people who bought their houses in 2007 were optimists, and things obviously didn't go well for them. Whereas pessimists would tend to not invest their money at the right time when the market is going up, and therefore lose out money that way. So any sort of opportunities. Pessimism and optimism are only two of the many biases that are there. So I would just advise your audience to check it out. Another one that I strongly encourage people to avoid is called status quo bias. That's our tendency to not change when we should change, because our autopilot system, that really powerful one, doesn't like change. It likes things to be stable and comfortable and not change. So if you can imagine people who don't go to the dentist in time when their teeth are hurting. And then because they are afraid of the dentist and getting pain from the dentist, and then their teeth have to be pulled instead of just having a root canal done.
Gleb, let's be honest here. For the last 25 years of your work, you've been watching me, haven't you? You've been watching me, haven't you? No, I'm just teasing. Continue.
Yes, you're my case study. There you go.
Well, you got, hey, it's a good one. It's working for you.
For sure.
There you go.
So that's the kind of problems that people run into. And that's one of many problems. When I go into businesses, one of the things that happens with businesses is that they don't change nearly often enough for their own good. Kind of.
What do you say don't change? What do you mean?
So businesses often, the conditions around them change, the environment changes,
Sure.
and they don't change with them. For example, Blockbuster recently went out of business because of the internet and Netflix and so on. Now, something you may not know is that about a decade ago, Netflix approached Blockbuster when Netflix was in its early stage and said,
Of course they did.
Let's work together. This would be great. And Blockbuster was like, no, we are the giant. You are nothing. And now Netflix is, dominating, and Blockbuster is over.
Yes, it is. Yes,
Where's your stores now?
Do you remember when you had to go to the movie store to rent a movie?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to really walk around the store and think about. You had to think about what you were going to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that kind of comes back to the point, isn't it? I mean, you know,
And the one you wanted to watch was always rented.
always.
That's-
Yeah, I was going.
With that little cubby hole with the porn movies.
Good old
Warren
movie buffs, right?
You've been watching me too.
I mean, I came over here to this Wikipedia page on cognitive biases, and there's so many. I mean, this rabbit hole goes deep. This is life's work. This isn't just something you go spend a year or two in college and understand. Right. I mean, there's psychology, and then there's this. Yeah. You know what I mean? This is
the science behind the psychology.
Oh my goodness, it just goes so deep. I mean, tell me about what is cognitive dissonance? Because I've heard that term before, but I don't really understand it.
Sure. Cognitive dissonance is when you think two things at once. So cognitive dissonance, for example, is when you when a part of you doesn't want to take the second piece of chocolate cake, but then you find yourself taking the second piece of chocolate cake, and you're like, wait, why are there crumbs on my plate? And I feel full inside.
You're literally ignoring your own thoughts, ignoring it as they happen.
That's right. So that's kind of what happens, and it's a very common phenomenon in the scholarship that's called acrasia, acting against your better judgment. And so that's essentially when your autopilot system takes over in a way that your intentional system doesn't want it to. So again, eating too much is often the case. Yeah. For people with addictions, gamblers, alcohol addicts, it's doing those things.
All right, where'd you put the bug? It's in my apartment. I just know it. I just know it.
He's watching you big time. So tell me, Gleb, how do we go about recognizing these behaviors and changing them? How do we even know that things are wrong? And you know what I mean?
And that's the biggest thing. It's
because we're all on autopilot. You know what I mean? We're all comfortable in our little groove that we're in, and
even if it's terrible,
how do we even know that there's something wrong? It's a rut. Yeah, for sure.
So one really good thing, something that I'll offer your audience is that if they want to, I have a tip sheet on making good decisions and avoiding disastrous decisions. If they email me at gleb@intentionalinsights.org and tell me that they heard me on TTR Unleashed, I'll send them a free copy, whereas otherwise it will cost money. So again,
thank you, Gleb.
Insights.org, at TTR Unleashed, free tip sheet on this stuff.
Hey, that's amazing. Thank you.
That's really cool.
Sure.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And this is something that will help them notice and avoid bad decisions in their decision-making on any significant decision. It goes through a variety of common cognitive biases that people have when they make decisions. For example, if you want to, let's say, purchase a new car, you want to look at things like avoiding optimism bias and avoiding pessimism bias. Now, I don't know who you are, the individual who's doing this.
No, I'm just teasing.
the individual who I'm talking to, the person reading the tip sheet, but they should check for both optimism bias and pessimism bias. In the past, have they have decisions that they made turned out to be too optimistic or too pessimistic? Well, you need to correct for that. Have you, when you go out to a meeting with someone, are you constantly late by 10 minutes? Well, then start going out earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That's an optimistic tendency. It's a tendency of thinking that nothing will go wrong, and so that's why people intuitively tend to be late to meetings, because their intuitions causes them to think that nothing will go wrong. It takes me 10 minutes to drive there, and I'll leave 10 minutes in advance. And then they forget that their car might be out of gas, or they will forget their laptop at their house or something like that, which often happens, but they don't plan this stuff into it.
So is there some kind of balance between optimism and pessimism? Or is one better than the other? Or
there's no better. There's no specific better. It's about learning your own biases, who you are with your personalities. So the list of over 100 biases that's there, different people are vulnerable to them to a different extent.
Indeed.
Some people are more pessimistic, some people are more optimistic, and you need to learn where you are and correct for your own biases. One of the fundamental strategies for dealing with biases is called de-anchoring. So it's, anchor and de-anchoring.
Yes.
It's about getting away from your own biases. So I, for example, am a pretty big optimist. I think the grass is greener on the other side. I'm excited about meeting new people and doing these radio shows and doing new things, new projects, and so on. And I tend to forget that not everything will turn out as good as I hope it will be. Also, this radio show is turning out great.
Awesome. Glad to hear it, dude.
Yes, it is.
So, that not all people will be nice and not all people will keep their words. These are things that it's hard for me to remember intuitively. So I have to correct for that and de-anchor and be like, okay, I have to be more pessimistic than I intuitively feel. And I have to, check when I send emails to people for anything they might misread. And I have to remember that if someone committed to doing something, there's only, a 60% probability that they'll do it or something like that.
Really?
Wow.
Is that a real number?
No, I think that's a little optimistic.
Well, it came from an optimist, so.
Right. Take it away, Warren.
Well, I mean, come on. How many times when somebody says, hey, let's grab coffee sometime, do they actually, want to grab coffee with you?
Yeah. They wouldn't say sometime. They'd say tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
3.
Oh, no, I'll be there. I'll be there, Warren. You bet.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm going to the gym this morning, I swear.
Told you 60% chance is high.
Yeah. Optimism, indeed.
Wow.
So that's something that I have to correct for. And that's something that, my wife is actually the opposite. So she's pessimistic. She thinks things will not go well. She thinks the grass is yellow on the other side.
Now, you guys started intentionalinsights.org together. Is that correct?
Yes, we started a nonprofit together. So
what a dynamic.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic. We had a lot more conflicts early onward before we learned to correct and collaborate together well for each other's optimism and pessimism. Sure. Now, kind of, I help inspire her and motivate her in new projects, and she helps bring my feedback to the ground when I'm kind of, have these new ideas, and so it's a good collaboration. But it's only after we learned to work together, and because we know about these biases and how they work. There are so many other couples who spend their whole lives just fighting, and they don't realize why they're fighting.
Even individuals.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because their intuitions lead them in the wrong directions, and they don't realize that, this is something that they can correct for and they can take advantage of.
That's cool. Hey, Gleb, we got just a couple minutes left, and I want to get in at least one question from the chat room. They've been scrolling across the screen like mad, and we haven't got to any of them. So
thank you, Jason. Sorry,
people, but I'm going to get to this one from Lorraine. Is it possible that what irks us in other people is really just us seeing in others something we don't like about ourselves? And is that a bias?
There is something called projection, and that's something that happens sometime. So projection is when we project on other people something that we experience ourselves. For example, if someone causes us to feel bad about something that, let's say, I'll give an example. My mother often does this with me. When she's worried about something that I'm doing, let's say, I get a lot of hate mail due to my public activism, and she gets worried about people.
Is that true?
Yes, that's true. Especially my political activism.
Why?
Because I'm an activist for truth and reason in politics, and that involves calling out BS sometimes.
We've got to have him back on, gentlemen. We've got to dig into that rabbit hole.
Did you say truth and reason in politics?
Yes,
I don't even understand what you're saying. What?
So my next book is actually called The Alternative to Alternative Facts, Fighting Post-Truth Politics with Behavioral Science.
Awesome. Well, listen, everybody, visit intentionalinsights.org to learn about Gleb Tsipursky's work. And listen, you can also visit his personal website at glebtsipursky.com. Hey, nice coffee.
Thanks for
there.
spelling that.
You betcha. Listen, this work is fascinating, and the world could use a lot more of you, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you for having me on.
We will count on us having you back on. I want to dig into that last little bit. That was, man, that just went.
We could go on for another half hour.
Seriously, I want to keep asking questions. But thank you again, Gleb, and we will be in touch. Okay.
Absolutely. Great.
Thanks again.